In Genesis chapter 6, there are 4 verses that the church has quietly avoided for over 1,000 years. Not because they're unimportant, because they're too important. These 4 verses describe a race of giants, born from a union between divine beings and human women, whose existence was so corrupting to creation that God responded with a flood to erase every living thing from the earth. And then the Bible almost never mentions them again. That silence is not an accident. The word is Nephilim. In Hebrew, it comes from the root meaning to fall, fallen ones. It appears exactly twice in the entire Bible, once in Genesis 6 and once in Numbers 13, when 12 spies return from Canaan and report trembling that they saw the descendants of Anak there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, they say, and we looked the same to them. For 2,000 years, theologians have disagreed on what the Nephilim were. Some say they were simply the offspring of powerful human rulers, the sons of God being the line of Seth, the godly lineage, intermarrying with the ungodly daughters of Cain. Others, including the oldest interpretation we have, preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls, say the sons of God were exactly what they sound like, divine beings, angels, who descended to earth and took human wives. The Book of Enoch describes this in extraordinary detail: their names, their crimes, what they taught humanity, and why God ultimately had to act. Here's what makes this so significant. The Book of Enoch was not fringe. It was quoted directly in the New Testament. The Apostle Jude cited it, Peter referenced it, and for 300 years the early church read it alongside the letters of Paul. Then it was removed. Today we're going to find out why. Let's start with the text itself. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. 4 verses, that's it. The Hebrew root of Nephilim means to fall. The Nephilim were, linguistically, the fallen ones, or those who caused others to fall. But notice something extraordinary in that passage. The text says the Nephilim were present before the sons of God took wives, and also afterward. That phrase, "and also afterward," is crucial. It suggests the Nephilim were not simply the children of this union. They already existed, and the union produced something else: the Gibborim, the mighty ones, the heroes of old. Now, who are the sons of God? This is where the 2 interpretations diverge completely. The Sethite interpretation, which became dominant in the medieval church, argues that sons of God simply means the righteous line of Seth, and daughters of men means the unrighteous line of Cain. Their intermarriage corrupted the godly bloodline, which is why God sent the flood. This interpretation has one significant problem. The phrase B'nai Elohim, sons of God, appears only 5 times in the entire Old Testament. In Job chapter 1, Job chapter 2, and Job chapter 38, it clearly and unambiguously refers to divine beings in God's heavenly court, angels, supernatural entities. There is no instance anywhere in the Hebrew Bible where B'nai Elohim means righteous human men. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, produced 2 centuries before Christ, and the version most quoted in the New Testament, translates sons of God in Genesis 6 as angeloi, angels. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century, describes the Nephilim as the offspring of angels who consorted with women. And the Book of Enoch, written between the 3rd and 1st century before Christ, names these angels, the Watchers, 200 of them, led by Semyaza. They descended on Mount Hermon, they swore an oath, and they began to corrupt everything God had made. The Book of Enoch opens with a vision. The prophet Enoch, the same Enoch mentioned in Genesis chapter 5, the man who walked with God and was no more because God took him away, receives a revelation about what happened before the flood. 200 angels, called the Watchers, looked down from heaven at the daughters of men and desired them. Their leader Semyaza feared to act alone, so they all swore an oath together, a pact to descend, to take wives, and to bear children. Their offspring were the Nephilim, giants 300 cubits tall in some manuscripts, consuming all the food of the earth, then consuming the humans themselves when the food ran out. But the Watchers didn't just corrupt through their children. They taught. Azazel taught men to make swords, shields, and armor. He taught women the art of cosmetics and seduction. Other Watchers taught enchantments, divination, astrology, and the cutting of roots for sorcery. In one compact vision, Enoch describes the entire spectrum of human corruption flowing not from human curiosity alone, but from a deliberate transfer of forbidden knowledge from angelic beings to humanity. Why does this matter to the New Testament? Because Jude chapter 1 verse 6 says this, "And the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day." And 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment." Peter connects this directly to the flood of Noah's day. These are not generic references to the devil's fall before creation. These are references to a specific group of angels who sinned in a specific, documented way and were imprisoned for it. The New Testament assumes its readers know this story, because in the first century they did. They had read Enoch. Then, in the 4th century, Jerome's Latin Vulgate became the official text of the Western Church. The Book of Enoch was not included. Debates about which texts were authoritative hardened into official canon lists. And the story of the Watchers, which had explained Genesis 6 to Jewish and Christian readers for 400 years, quietly disappeared from public teaching. It was not destroyed. Copies survived in Ethiopia, where the Ethiopian Orthodox Church still includes Enoch in its canon today. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in 1947, contained multiple copies, confirming it was central to the community at Qumran. It wasn't lost. It was set aside. Now here is the detail that most Bible readers miss entirely. Genesis 6 verse 4 says the Nephilim were on earth in those days, and also afterward. And also afterward. Numbers 13 takes place approximately 800 years after the flood. The 12 spies return from Canaan. Their report? "We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Enoch come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes." How did Nephilim survive the flood if Noah's flood was global and killed everything? Several explanations exist in the tradition. 1. The flood narrative focuses on the world as known to the ancient Israelites, and some giant clans survived in Canaan. 2. The corruption that produced the Nephilim recurred after the flood, which is precisely what "and also afterward" implies. But there's a third reading, buried in the conquest narratives of Deuteronomy and Joshua. When God commands Israel to utterly destroy the Canaanite nations, Og of Bashan, Goliath's people the Philistines, the Anakites, the text gives physical descriptions. Og's iron bed was 13 feet long. Goliath stood over 9 feet tall. The sons of Rapha, the Rephaim, appear repeatedly as targets of complete destruction. Some scholars argue this was not ethnic cleansing. It was the completion of the judgment begun at the flood, a targeted elimination of the corrupted bloodlines. Whether or not you accept that reading, this much is clear. The Nephilim tradition did not end with Genesis. It runs through the entire Old Testament, resurfaces in the New Testament's references to imprisoned angels, and shapes the conquest of Canaan in ways that standard teaching completely ignores. Why does this matter? 3 reasons. First, it explains the flood. The standard reading of Noah's flood portrays God destroying humanity because humans became wicked. True, but incomplete. Genesis chapter 6 verse 9 calls Noah perfect in his generations. The Hebrew word tamim, often translated blameless, can also mean without blemish, physically uncorrupted, unblemished in his lineage. If the Nephilim corruption was genetic, a contamination spreading through the human population through reproduction, then the flood was not simply a moral reset, it was a biological one. Noah was preserved precisely because his line had not been corrupted by the Watcher bloodline. Second, it reframes the problem of evil. Western Christianity tends to locate the origin of human corruption entirely in the garden, in Adam's choice. And the garden is fundamental. But the Watcher tradition adds a layer. Human evil was also taught, amplified, and structurally embedded in civilization by beings who brought corrupting knowledge intentionally. The war in Genesis is not only between God and disobedient humanity. It is between God and a rebellion that started before the garden, and which continued to operate within human history. Third, it makes Revelation intelligible. The final chapters of Revelation describe imprisoned beings being released from the abyss, the same abyss referenced in Enoch as the prison of the Watchers. The convergence at the end of history isn't only about human choices. It involves the completion of a cosmic conflict that began in Genesis 6. This is why the Nephilim story was not deleted from the Bible. It couldn't be. It's woven into too much that follows. It was simply obscured, kept in footnotes, left for scholars in dusty seminaries. We're done keeping it there. If this changed how you read Genesis, even slightly, then subscribe. Every week, After Eden goes deeper into the stories the text contains but teaching rarely reaches. The next video explores one of the most disturbing passages in the Old Testament, the moment God commanded something that should have been impossible, and a man obeyed. Comment below. Before today, did you know the Nephilim story extended beyond Genesis 6? I want to know what you'd heard. See you next week.